let's have a very nice Friday together here this morning on the show. I am Bosin Amafai. We welcome you from our headquarters here in Lagos. Thank you very much for finding time to be on the show. It's a very busy day, and that's taking us through the weekend into another very busy business week, wrapping up the month of January. Today, investment and securities trading firm Afrinvest is launching its annual economic outlook report for 2020. That's taking place here in Lagos. At the same time, another investment bank, United Capital, listed on the stock exchange, is holding a session on markets outlook for the new year with Bismarck Rewani and Pricewaterhouse partner and senior economist Andrew Nevin on the panel of discussants. And taking off the next week, the Chartered Institute of Bankers will release its outlook for business and economy in 2020 and examining the global and domestic factors with an outlook for the economy and the markets on January the 28th. That's on Tuesday. So it's going to be a very big Tuesday, as you may already know, because Deloitte in Dialogue Nigeria Economic Outlook Annual Summit with the Minister of Finance, Zainab Ahmed, Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu, and others, including head of MDAs and private sector folks, will be attending this very big event, also scheduled for Lagos. That's also on Tuesday. Meantime, on Wednesday, the Africa CEO Network is holding a very important discussion around how to get the best of the best for families, businesses in Nigeria. A very big story, how to attract, retain, and manage big talents for business families. That's led by KPMG Nigeria, and that's for you on 29. That's on our calendar. But the big story today, and everyone is keeping an eye on, is the Central Bank of Nigeria's Monetary Policy Committee meeting for the first time in 2020. Nova Merchant Bank has released an economic research report ahead of today's central bank's decisions, saying there's going to be dovish stance, but hawkish actions. According to the three-page report, the odds are largely in favor of a hold of monetary policy parameters. According to Nova Merchant Bank economic commentary, there will be likely higher CRR, that's cash reserve ratio, sometime in 2020 by the central bank to combat the system's rising liquidity. They went on to highlight the continued differentiated CRR will continue in the new year, depending on each bank's loan-to-deposit ratio level against the regulatory a threshold of 65%, which, of course, the central bank says will be revisited by the end of March. The bank also, Nova Merchant Bank also forecasts an announcement of administrative measures by the central bank to continue to manage the system. Meantime, the unorthodox policies of the financial regulator will continue according to this research report, and the central bank may test newer policies in 2020 to ensure the stability of the foreign exchange market. In terms of the country's FX reserves, that could touch a low of $33.56 billion this year, but may remain around $36.4 billion on possible borrowings by the government. That's all part of the pre-announcement. Today, we're live, as always, from 1:30 in the afternoon to join the central bank governor's briefing between 2 and 2:30. It's a Friday, if you remember. Usually this takes place on Tuesdays, but it's been shifted. So you need to join our panelists here from Deloitte Nigeria, from Chapel Hill, and from Cordros Capital. We have a studio full of discussants later this afternoon, just around lunchtime. So Nigeria has about $200 million in cabotage funds that folks are in the maritime sector angling to lay their hands on. The fund, which is set aside by the Nigerian authorities, is to help Nigerian indigenous businesses get to do more in the maritime business, in vessel, in moving cargoes and what have you, as we look forward to the expiration of the 5-year period, which has been set to reduce the overarching position of foreign businesses in Nigeria's cabotage business. That is what the Minister of Transport, Rotimi Amici, told journalists who cornered him at an event yesterday in Lagos. Take a listen to the minister trying to clarify that for everyone. The state of the cabotage industry and the maritime sector, of course, had been spoken upon here on Business Morning a week ago by the Director General of NIMASA, Dr. Dakuku Peterside, who clarified that Nigeria will draw the curtain on a 5-year moratorium, which is already being given to foreign owners, vessels doing business in Nigerian waters. So that's what the minister, of course, who is responsible for that parastatal NIMASA, clarified yesterday. Take a listen to Rotimi Amici, the Honorable Minister for Transport.
The responsibility will be transferred to the lending institutions. So nobody will just walk away with the fund. It means that you must be held responsible for the funds that are accrued to you.
Sir, I'm talking about responsibility being transferred to the financial institution. Are you saying, the financial institution will be the one chasing the ship owners for?
No, they will first and foremost give them the necessary reason that it will take for them to borrow the money. So if you don't have it, you can't borrow the money. So that's why I say the risk will be borne by the lending institutions.
Yes, sir. So for camera purposes, sir, I don't know, prior to this time when you made the announcement that the CBFF will be discussed this year, the ship owners kind of expressed confidence in what you said. But one of the key issues they raised was that they need to know how much exactly is in the CBFF.
The DG NIMASA did announce $200 million.
$200 million.
Yes.
Sir, okay.
With these guidelines out, will this not, hamper the disbursement eventually?
How? When you have to, how will $200 million hamper the disbursement of the fund?
With the guidelines, with the
there must be rules. That's what the law says. There must be rules by which anybody will borrow the money, or which anybody will qualify first to be allowed to borrow. After that, you approach the lending institutions, who in turn will put their own expectations in place, because if you just allow people just go and take that money and walk away, we will not get it back. The idea is to enhance development of the maritime industry, and to do that, people must borrow and return for others to be able to borrow, and that will grow the economy. One of them said he had 30 vessels, and I want to say 16. I say if you have all these vessels, the number of persons you would have employed would have been high. So the more vessels we acquire, the more persons we create employment for, and the more the growth of the economy. That's the idea. That's why the president agreed for the disbursement of the fund.
Sir, Section 43 of the Cabotage Act.
You have one.
Stipulates that the source of funding for the CBFF comes from 4 sources, which includes the approval of funds from the National Assembly. While I was inside, I overheard that the National Assembly is yet to approve any. Are you looking at
the guidelines? Once the guidelines are ready, we'll send it to the National Assembly for approval.
I was talking about the $200 million cabotage fund for Nigerian maritime sector. Rotimi Amici, the Honorable Minister in charge of transport. So from transportation, let's talk about housing. Mr. President Muhammadu Buhari spoke about it in his New Year letter, and he's spoken about it in the past as well. And of course, part of the program of housing delivery, which used to be under the Ministry of Power, Works and Housing. That's not been carved out, as we have a new Works and Housing under the Babatunde Raji Fashola SAN's portfolio. So let's talk about the housing sector. Why is it difficult to have affordable housing for the people, and what is the current state of Nigeria's real estate sector? And if we can use the Market Street to deliver unnecessary housing. Let's get this conversation with Oluwa Segun Abolaji, who is a member of the Nigerian Institute of Builders and is also a member of the Real Estate Association folks in Nigeria. He's an expert in that industry. Good morning. He's live to us from Abuja Studios. Segun, it's good to have you on the program this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you. A quick one. Let's get straight to business. We've talked so much about housing for the people, housing for the poor. Years ago, there was all about affordable housing for the people. It was part of Vision 2010. It was part of Vision 2020. Why is it so difficult for us to deliver on this promise, administration after administration, regime after regime?
Thank you. We will continue to have problem of delivering affordable housing if the necessary things are not put in place. One of the biggest factors is the issue of land. The Land Use Act needs to be reviewed, and if that is not done, we may have a lot of problems because land, the cost of land itself contributes to about 60% of the cost of housing. Now, if it's very difficult for developers, private developers or individuals to get this land in question, then how do you intend to achieve affordable housing? It's practically impossible. Let's leave aside the issue of building materials, but let's concentrate more on land allocation. The professionals, those who are in the business of providing housing for Nigerians, should be included. Take, for example, in Nigeria, there's a Land Use Act and Allocation Committee that has been set up by every governor before land is being allocated. These professionals and the real estate sector is not being included. Only civil servants and politicians are being considered. In that case, you get to buy the land at a very exorbitant rate, and in turn, how do you intend to make profit? Because we are businessmen, for example, and by the time we buy at a very high price and add up your profit, then we can achieve affordable housing.
Okay, I like what you put about so why do we get fixated over the price of cement when we talk about housing? When you sort out the cost of land and what have you, for those of you who are developers and what have you, then you now to deal with other building materials and other permits. So, is affordable housing possible, and by who? Is this something that you think the federal government can lead from the front, or you private sector builders, those of you who are in the real estate, can actually lead, or you think the banking sector or financial services industry can help you? How do we deliver on this?
It's all inclusive because the government has to do more. The government has been trying in its own best, but they still have to do more, probably by subsidizing the price of building materials. If that is done, it will go a long way. At the same time, it's very difficult to nowadays to have access to federal mortgage loans and all that. So governments need to do more by subsidizing the materials and probably having a meeting with the producers, because most of them are from the private sector, the importers of the reinforcement, the iron rod, the cement production and all that. So government needs to have a stakeholders forum such that we can have these building materials, the prices crash down. And by that way, we can achieve a lot, aside from the issue of the cost of land.
What type of engagements have you, private sector people, are having amongst yourself, and have you been engaging the government at various levels in any way to try and resolve this and try and plug our housing deficit?
Yes, we've been doing a lot of that. Redan as a body, which is the umbrella body for all developers in Nigeria, has been doing its best, collaborating with government agencies to ensure that we are carried along with all housing policies. And another point that we need to note is, the housing policies in Nigeria needs to also be reviewed. And that we have to do by approaching the National Assembly. When the right policies are put in place, I'm sure the implementation as well should not be a problem. But when you have faulty policies, you have faulty acts, it's really a big problem. So Redan, on its part, has been doing a lot to ensure that everything is in place. And as you know, that the real housing sector is a very huge contributor to the national, to the GDP of Nigeria, and also a large-scale employer of labor. So if all these things are done, definitely the issue of unemployment will also be resolved. And insecurity, by the time you take affordable housing to the slum, people can now afford decent homes, then that will decongest the slums, and insecurity will also reduce.
What, in your opinion, Oluwasegun, what's the meaning of affordable housing? Is it a face me, I face you, or is it a one-bedroom flat, self-contained, Banana Island, whatever island, wherever that is? What is affordable housing? What's the amount? Do you have a figure somewhere in your head what that should be?
Well, if you're talking about affordable housing, like I used to say, affordability is relative. What A can afford may be different from what B can afford. But in the general definition of it, I think we should focus more on low-cost housing. You know, when you talk about low-cost housing, probably something that is maybe below 7 million naira that an average civil servant can afford. Like an ordinary Nigerian on the street, traders, everyone can afford it. That's what we refer to as affordable housing. And it shouldn't be an accommodation that is not conducive, because if you are talking about face me, I face you, I don't think that's a conducive environment. Every Nigerian is entitled to decent and affordable housing. By decent, I mean a house that you can really go and relax, and you don't have, that is not congested, that has all the facilities that makes life beautiful, and all the infrastructures are also attached. That's affordable housing.
Very interesting when we talk about that as affordable. But again, this low-cost housing have been built in a number of states by state government. They end up not being low cost in the real sense of the cost. 20 million, 15 million, 25 million, 30 million. Even when you go by civil servant, using the civil servant pay package as the basis, how many civil servants do we really have? Why do we use civil servants as the basis of discussing affordable housing and not the vulcanizer by the roadside?
Well, when you talk about the civil servants, they are considered as maybe those that earn, that they are living, their minimum wage is either the middle class or fall within the lower ends of the economy. So the vulcanizers, the mechanics also fall within this range. But I think civil servant is just a standard that we use. And when you're talking about affordable housing built by state government, and they call it 20 million, 30 million, that's not affordable. That's luxury homes. Anybody who is buying any house that is more than maybe 7 million or 5 million, I don't think that is affordable. That's not affordable at all. And the federal government, I think, through some schemes like the Family Homes Fund, have been able to do a lot in that aspect too. But they still need to do much more, because the quality control has to be considered as well. That takes us back to the issue of building materials. Because if the building material that is being used, trying to consider affordable housing, and you say, okay, if you can deliver this house for 5 million, then you begin to use materials that are not of quality or cannot stand the test of time. That's another problem. So the prices of material need to be crushed. At the same time, the cost of land. Land should be easily accessible. Or if it's going to be purchased at all, then it should be at a very minimal rate.
Segun, stand by with us in Abuja studios. We want to continue this conversation after the break. We want to ask you a few more questions around the real estate market in big cities in Nigeria. What are the prices? What is happening in there? Reports say that the market has really crashed, as it were, and a lot of houses that are unoccupied. Then we want to ask you, where do you get the money? How do we bring in the securities market and the banks into the conversation? So, Segun, stand by. We'll have this conversation, and we're including another guest to discuss this with you. Stand by, everyone. We'll be right back in 2 minutes. Oluwasegun Abolaji is a member of the Nigerian Institute of Builders and also the head of communications for the Association of real estate operators in Nigeria. So that's where we continue this second part of the conversation with you. Segun, thank you so much for standing by in our Abuja studio. So let's talk about the other side. We'll talk about building. Let's talk about the real estate market. Is it true that prices, or that this market has tanked significantly in recent years? If that is true, how bad is it?
Well, in the recent years, we all cannot shy away from the fact that the economic situation in the market has really affected the real estate sector, even though real estate sector still remains one of the biggest contributors to the Nigerian GDP. The real estate market is so bad for the past few years, but I think for a few months now, it has started picking up again as the economy continues to revamp.
How bad is it when you talk about prices? Is it that you have a glut in the market? That's what we're trying to find out here. Is there a glut in the market? How low are prices at the moment? Are they entry prices? Are folks willing to take lower prices for this real estate?
You know, when we talk about the real estate market, you also need to consider how much was expended in putting up some of these buildings. So if, for example, you are building a luxury home and you've spent about 80 million naira or 100 million naira to put up that house, and probably you want to make a profit of 10 or 20 million, and the economy has affected the market because people can no longer afford so much. So the prices, you begin to crash it. And if you cannot crash, that's why we have a lot of unoccupied houses all over the town, especially in Abuja, in Lagos, in major cities of Nigeria. So you may not be willing to also go below your cost price. So at worst scenario, maybe you want to sell at the cost price. But if you can't sell below your cost price, that means you leave it and the house may stay there for as long as 5 years. If we take away the issue of those houses that are built with illicit funds and all that. But those who are genuinely in the business, who are in the business of providing houses, it does not even apply only to the luxury homes. Even as low as 15 million houses, 30 million houses, 25 million houses are built and nobody is occupying them, nobody is buying. So that's how bad the market is right now.
So how are you folks surviving in this major downturn in Nigeria's real estate market?
Well, we have to remain in business, good or bad. As we all know that business is all about profit and loss. So when the chips are down, you just have to know how to manage. And, you know, you keep going. It's not entirely bad, like there's no sales at all. It's just that the turnout is very low these days. That's what it is.
So do you see any silver lining on the horizon when we talk about what the government is talking about building some thousands of housing units in certain parts of the country, as Mr. President has mentioned, as the Honorable Minister in charge of Works and Housing had mentioned? Do you see this as a tonic for your industry, for the building and the real estate market?
Well, for the market, I may not totally agree that it's going to bring any serious tonic, because most of these houses that are being built are probably contracted to people who are not real estate practitioners. And by so doing, how do you want the private sector to survive? So government is doing its best by bringing these policies, you know, to help out. But the private sector in particular is not being carried along, and that is a huge problem because governments alone cannot do it. They need to include the Real Estate Developers Association of Nigeria because we are the ones in the business of providing affordable houses to all Nigerians.
When you say the government should involve you or your association, what exactly do you folks want in simple ABC black and white? What do you want?
One, the government should include professionals in the real estate sector in the land use and allocation committee, such that when these lands are being allocated for the purpose of affordable housing, I mean, we should be able to be part of that committee so we can advocate for low-cost housing. You know, in a case where the real estate developers buy at exorbitant rates from people who are not businessmen, from people who are not into this business, whom they just allocate plots to, and they in turn sell billions of naira to real estate developer, then, you know, we are in a big mess. And if such initiatives is going to be carried out, like construction of low-cost housing or affordable housing by the government, then the Real Estate Developers Association of Nigeria should also be carried along so that we know, we are experts in this field, we know about the designs from the initiation to completion. So it shouldn't be left to government, to politicians and civil servants alone. That's what we advocate for.
Do you have any idea of a figure of the housing deficit in Nigeria?
Nigeria does not have an accurate data to that effect, but like the popular data in the market, that Nigeria has about 16 million housing deficit. The world, the UN figure is what I rely on more, which is about 16 million housing deficits all over the world, with sub-Saharan Africa responsible for over 60% of this. And we'll talk about the sub-Saharan Africa. Nigeria is the most populous. So it means we have a greater percentage of that 60% of the world housing deficit figure.
So about how many houses do you think we can build in Nigeria that would make sure that everyone has a decent and affordable housing? In your, is it 10 million? Is it 15 million? If we build 15 million houses, then would have taken the homeless people off the streets, those congested face me, I face you I mentioned earlier, which is very popular in this jurisdiction, can be phased out into something much better and decent for living.
Well, if you talk about the figure, the 16 million or 17 million figure that is the popular thing we hear all around, then you also have to consider the increase in the population, because the housing needs will keep increasing as more people are crossing the line from adolescent to adulthood. So if you provide 17 million houses, for example, in Nigeria, as at this year, by next year, you still need to provide more. So it's a continuous process that cannot be stopped. That we can't say a particular figure should be built now, and then by next year or maybe in the next 10 years, we are okay. No, it has to be a continuous process.
I get your point. That's the way to think forward. The last question. Are you worried about the level of interest rates, exchange rate, and all of that in sourcing for fund for housing, for real estate?
Well, that is very disastrous for the real estate business, because most of the commercial banks, for example, you get double-digit interest rates. And I mean, at the end of the day, when we talk about affordable housing, by the time you factor in the interest rates, and take, for example, like these houses that have been built over the years and have not been sold, the interest keep increasing, and most of them runs into bad debt. So government needs to do more in terms of regulation so that we can have a single-digit interest rate. That will help a lot.
Oluwasegun Abolaji, member of Nigerian Institute of Builders and the head of communications at the Real Estate Association of Nigeria. Thank you so much for coming through, speaking to your industry, very critical housing sector in Nigeria. Thank you so much. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of the weekend.